For over 100 years, or 400 years, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People has fought for and won many important battles in the courts, in the streets, in the suites of corporate power, in the halls of Congress and state legislatures across the country. This is a man who serves as the federal, legislative, and national public policy director of this 500,000 member organization. And when he speaks in Congress, he's like E.F. Hutton. When he speaks, they listen. Ladies and gentlemen, please receive warmly our friend, our brother, and our leader, the director of the NAACP Washington Bureau, Hilary Shelton.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, I do want to thank Public Campaign for the leadership they provided on this issue. Not only here, can you hear me? I'm sorry. Not only here, but throughout the country. Quite frankly, that leadership has been extremely courageous, and it's brought organizations like the NAACP that have always fought for the interests and concerns of everyday people into this particular movement. This is a movement to reclaim our government that very well we've seen, and I see all the time. Let me say, I serve as the lobbyist for the NAACP. I'm the guy that wants people like Willis Edwards, who serves on our national board of directors, gets word from our membership base through a process in which we democratically, with a small d, move issues up from local communities to decide what's important to us. The feeling is that we're not heard, quite frankly, by members of Congress, not heard by many others, with few exceptions. And certainly Donna Edwards and Barbara Lee are the exceptions to too often the rule here in Washington and other places throughout the country. But very well, we've moved through a process to have to address issues because we have a system that is broken. A system that very well, the megaphone is determined by the size of the cash contribution, which is determined by the depth of the pocket. So when I go to Capitol Hill lobbying for things that seem like they make good sense, you know, we went through a process in which about 1,800 delegates are elected from all over the country that come together like any other political party convention, from local neighborhoods and communities that say that, you know, we've got to take on issues like racial profiling, or take on issues like the disparities in spending in public schools, or lack of access to health care. We take on issues like the extremely high cost of pharmaceutical drugs that may very well make our lives better, or even save our lives. But when I go to Capitol Hill and say, you know, it makes sense for us to start spending our public money, that is the money that comes from our coffers and the money that comes from our taxes, to help pay for these schools and whatnot, for some reason what seems to make good sense, what seems to be the voice of the people that voted and went to the polls to elect those that are now serving in the halls of Congress, the 435 in the House and the 100 in the Senate, and even that one that happens to be in the White House, that for some reason those common sense issues don't carry the day. When we talked about issues like health care, we have 47 million Americans that have no health care insurance. We have local communities that end up carrying the brunt, and hospitals actually closing because they found themselves having to address those issues. When we talk about issues like gun control, that indeed maybe the rights of children trying to get to school and mamas trying to go to the grocery store should somehow trump those who would wear camouflage, get drunk, and run through the forest shooting trees. That somehow or another those contributions have a tendency to trump the votes of the American people. So our fight now is to make sure that those voices are heard loudly and clearly. I can't tell you how many times I've walked through the halls of Capitol Hill, and I've spoken to people who should be friendly Congress people, even representing the African American community. But when I go and talk about credit card companies that actually had an introductory rate of 5%, and then after the first payment, increased that interest rate to 26%. They seem to make good sense, common sense, that something ought to be done about it. For some reason, nothing whatsoever is done about it. The NAACP called for a moratorium. We testified before Congress. We met with the American Bankers Association. We met with the Mortgage Brokers Association and said, look, 2 years ago, we saw that African Americans were losing their houses at tremendous rates. That indeed they were being given loans that because of no regulation, and somehow the regulations we fought for disappeared. But they were given loans in which they came in at an introductory rate at 4%, in which their escrow, you know, the insurance and the taxes were covered. They started out paying $1,500 a month on a $200,000 home with a 30-year mortgage. It was going to increase by 2% after 2 years and 2% more after 2 more years. But then what they weren't told is it's going to drop your escrow. You're going to have to pay your own taxes, and you're going to have to pay your own insurance. And then very well, it's going to increase yet again. We had people whose monthly mortgage notes went from $1,500 a month to $2,400 a month they could not afford to pay. And what they didn't pay them, and what we fought to have them addressed right away, is something called an early payment penalty. Now, I used to think an early payment penalty showed how I lacked the sophistication of understanding how mortgages works as well. If you told me that one of the things you're going to have to watch out for is an early payment penalty, my response would be, I'll be lucky if I can pay it on time. So I'm not worried about a penalty. But what they didn't tell you is that meant that even though the broker told you that you were going to that you could very well flip the loan over, that is, refinance at the end of 6 years. What they didn't tell you is on that $250,000 home that you really couldn't afford in the first place, if you just held on long enough, you'd be able to turn it over and get a new mortgage. They didn't tell you you're going to have to pay $12,000 in a penalty just to be able to enter a new mortgage loan. Those kind of issues make good common sense that we would have some champions on Capitol Hill that would have been able to watch out for our interests. And 2 years ago, we told them that very well the African-American community so often serving as that canary in the mine shaft. You know what I'm talking about? When it hits us first. And very well, even as we screamed as loudly as we could with the megaphone we got drowned out by those who had the resources to afford to pay the expenses to make sure that when it was time for re-election, and every 2 years those members of the House had to come back for re-election, and every 6 years those members of the Senate had to come back and ask to be re-elected, that indeed we knew that as Donna Edwards so eloquently stated today, that right after, the day after they get elected, they're on the phone thanking their contributors for getting them elected and asking them to contribute to their war chest yet again. And it's a sad use of resources and time. We elect these great minds to be able to sit down and actually work out our problems as American citizens, to very well look at the issues that we're having to lay on the table because for some reason they end up missing it because they're spending so much time trying to raise money so they can stay here and do it again and again. Now, don't get me wrong. There is an advantage in incumbency. If you have that, with incumbency comes more power on Capitol Hill. But sadly, what also ends up happening is with incumbency also comes greater contributions from those big money interests. So we end up having to fight those things every day. So I sit here today because of how this system works, we still have no protection against predatory lenders. I sit here today because we still have no protection against racial profilers. I sit here today because our schools are still crumbling, and the folks that are going to benefit most from the monies that should have gone to those public schools went to Iraq, and very well somebody voted for that as well. So I'm delighted that Barbara Lee is actually one of the sponsors of this program, because of those who don't know, Barbara Lee was that single vote in the wilderness that actually said we got to have better sense than this. So let me just say the fight is on. I'm a lobbyist, and I admit that I'm a lobbyist. But I know where my support comes from. I know the communities that I serve. And I know that if I had to adhere to the same kind of corporate interests, my voice could very well be stifled as well. We've got to change this policy and change this program now. We've got to pass this bill.